Everyone. Good morning or good afternoon. It is about 12:30, just about time to start Batten hour this week. I am thrilled to welcome you here to Garrett Hall. My name is Amanda Crombie. I am our Assistant Dean for Academic Programs here at Batten. I have one short announcement for anyone who is graduating this week, and please, you can pick up your graduation regalia at the bookstore. Next week, it's VAs. I'm just supposed to remind everybody all the things. So there you go. I do have the distinct pleasure today, though, to welcome a friend of mine to Batten Hour. Professor Debbie Stroman is a professor at the Batten School and also an entrepreneur. Debbie joined the University of Virginia in 1978, and right off the bat was a pioneer in both her undergraduate studies and UVA athletics. She's standing over there, extending me the notes to the eyes right at the moment as I'm going to tell all about her. When she joined joined second-year head coach Debbie Ryan's basketball team in 1978, she became the first African-American woman to receive an athletic scholarship from the University of Virginia. Debbie also received the Algernon Sidney Sullivan Award in 1982, highlighting students who have a commitment to service and to leadership. Dr. Stroman became a team captain and graduated from UVA in 1982 with a bachelor's degree in history and social studies education. She then worked for a year at the NCAA's Volunteers for Youth program. Her travels took her to the North Carolina Triangle area, where she learned that UNC was starting a master's program in sport administration. While in graduate school at Chapel Hill, Stroman was an assistant coach and actually was the first Black female coach at the university on the UNC women's basketball team, which won the ACC title in 1984. After earning her master's degree, she went to work in the financial services area and found that she had a passion for sales. In 2003, she went back to school for 4 years and earned a PhD in leadership and organizational behavior from Capella University in Minnesota. She returned to UNC in 2007 and began teaching, focusing on leadership, sport business, entrepreneurship, and racial equity. Dr. Stroman has more than 3 decades of extensive experience working with senior administrators, faculty, staff, students, and alumni on leadership and equity issues. As an entrepreneur, she provides race and racism strategic consulting and education to numerous organizations, including the NIH, R1 academic institutions, Fortune 100, and nonprofits. And she serves as the national trainer for the Racial Equity Institute company. As the president emeritus of the UNC Black Faculty and Staff Caucus, she has been recognized for teaching, service, and entrepreneurship collaborations, along with Dr. Ying. Dr. Stroman co-designed and instructs the department's popular Leading for Racial Equity graduate course, which propelled similar instruction and education across the entire campus at UNC and beyond. Professor Stroman is the founding member of Ubunye.
Abunye.
Yes. A term which means unity in Zulu, which is a partnership between the UVA Alumni Association supporting Black alumni at UVA. All that being said, it is clear that we are both honored and humbled to have her here with us today. Please give your warmest welcome to Dr. Deborah Stroman.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Amanda. So let me see your jump shot. Let's see it. Wow. Okay. Looks good. Looks good. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's always good to be home here in Charlottesville. So as Amanda stated, I think I have a lot to say in this subject in a very short period of time. But my grounding as an athlete here at UVA, being a coach at UNC Chapel Hill, working for the NCAA, meeting so many athletic administrators and commissioners over the years, building a very strong relationship with the Atlantic Coast Conference, in particular under the leadership of John Swafford, who's since retired as commissioner, having the opportunity to provide my students experiential education by having them participate in ACC championships, and probably the highlight in terms of delivering real education to students is taking students to the national championship for college football. and being on the ground, on the team, actually assisting. So with that being said, I do have an overview. I certainly understand there's a varying level of learning in terms of college sport business in this space. So please be patient with others who might be seeing this or understanding this for the first time. Where you stand often depends on where you sit. Where you stand often depends on where you sit. And so I open up with this quote: growth and comfort do not coexist. And when we think about college sports, when we think about NIL, we think about the transfer portal. And even if we could step away and think about your own life and your own journey, whether or not that applies to you. Growth and comfort do not coexist. Hopefully you all know the athlete in the far upper left-hand corner, one of the greatest athletes ever to participate in UVA athletics, Katie Douglas, two-time Olympian. And I can just go on and on about what she's done as a great swimming athlete at UVA. But she is proud of being the first ever college athlete to sign a deal with Arena. That is a big brand in swimming and diving. And it is the second amateur endorsement deal that Arena had ever done based on the new NIL rules that came into effect in July 1 of 2021. Shedeur Sanders, the Shedeur Sanders, son of Deion Sanders, considered probably number one or number two in terms of the most money earned, valued at the University of Colorado, more than $6 million. Now, his influence was strong prior to Colorado. His following, his backing from Jackson State to being the son of Deion Sanders. But we're talking about real money here. And then, of course, the fans. So I'm asking you to consider this deeper dive into NIL from the perspective of the athletes, the perspective of the fans, and certainly the coaches and universities. So with the athletes and fans, just some thoughts. I think the true test of NIL is going to be how the fans accept it. It won't take long for the fans to turn on the university if the athletes overdo the money end of the fame thing. The more money they make, they're going to expect these athletes to carry themselves like pro athletes carry themselves. It's a pressure cooker for athletes, largely due to NIL. You're a student athlete, but now you're on your own businesswoman. It's a learning curve. It's been super hard. I already feel track and field is one job, and adding another job is crazy. It's like an additional school. It's hard. And then, of course, one of the most decorated NIL athletes, Olivia Livy Dunn at LSU, who wasn't a regular starter on the gymnastics team, but her beauty, her amazing athletic ability, one of the top NIL earners. And she stated, I had a hard time wondering if I should fuel my body like an athlete or a model. This is very, very challenging for many, many athletes all across the country. And then when we think about the coaches, the universities, and the stressors on them in terms of dollars and how to pay the bills and how to provide these opportunities, you're going to have to hustle for it. And we can teach you how to hustle. Well, what's their background and experience to make them good at this, such that they don't cause harm? It started out as boosters paying athletes somewhat disguised as NIL. Now we can just pay athletes directly. I don't have a problem with it. I was a little reluctant to accept it initially because I was worrying about locker room issues. It's not something that's affecting our team. I get to coach celebrities. This was Coach Kim Mulkey, one of the most famous women's basketball coaches at LSU. I don't know if she feels that way today, but that's how it started out. Sponsors and donors will stop providing money to athletic departments and will give to athletes instead. This was one of the major concerns with many athletic administrators when NIL first rolled out, and to a lot of the fundraising arms in college sports. A quarterback in the portal is now worth at least $2 million. College football is more competitive now. So again, perspectives from the athletes, from the fans, to the coaches, to the administrators, and certainly to our politicians. So what is the justification for NIL? Name, image, and likeness. Our Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh stated, "Nowhere else in America can businesses get away with agreeing not to pay their workers a fair market rate on the theory that their product is defined by not paying their workers a fair market rate. And under ordinary principles of antitrust law, it is not evident why college sports should be any different. The NCAA is not above the law." And so amateurism has been a big part of the fabric of the NCAA since its beginning. To oversimplify it, players are not supposed to be paid to play. And I think you all can kind of chuckle on that, all right? They're not supposed to be paid to play. Student athletes receive scholarships. But again, in 2021, the Supreme Court unanimously ruled against the NCAA in NCAA v. Austin that the NCAA could not limit education-related payments to student athletes. It can't limit it. The NCAA then deferred to state rules. And that's why we have a lot of confusion. And that's why many people are hoping for this federal settlement to hopefully kind of calm the storm and stop the wild, wild west that is occurring right now. Now, regardless of this settlement, two things remain true. Again, no pay for play, as in athletes aren't supposed to receive any type of compensation for their performance, and recruits aren't supposed to receive deals contingent on going to a certain school. They're not supposed to. So it's important to talk about capitalism when you talk about the business of sports. Free market capitalism decentralizes economic decisions, giving individuals control over what to produce, how much to charge, and what to buy. Now, certainly this is not a presentation on capitalism, but it's important for us to understand that this is the economic model of our country. Now, I personally don't believe that we have capitalism in its purest form anywhere in the world. And I don't believe we have socialism in its purest form anywhere in the world, and communism. But the idea behind the free market is that two individuals, myself and Mr. Brian here, that if Brian has something to sell and I'm interested in buying it, then we can work it out. We can have an exchange, two individuals. And hopefully our greater angels will rule. He will set a fair price. I will accept that price. There might be some negotiation back and forth, but we can walk away from each other, shaking one another's hands, saying, I'm happy, you're happy, we all win. And then there are others who believe there is no way, with my self-interest and Brian's self-interest, that we can negotiate and come to that common good, where we both walk away happy. Someone's self-interest might lead to manipulation, might lead to someone being burned, someone being harmed. And so that's why we need regulation. As in, buyers and sellers coming into this free market exchange cannot work together to ensure that both parties are okay. Now, I don't know where you stand on all this, but there is no doubt that in our country, we have built up guardrails, we have built up rules and regulations to ensure that this free market exchange is going to work well for both. And that's the essence of what we're talking about here. Free market within college sports. Very little to any government control. And so the court recognized that the NCAA holds monopsony power over the athletes, as in limiting the labor market for players and impacting their eligibility and competition for their schools, as in the NCAA was doing something wrong. As in the NCAA is the single buyer and it controls the market for this particular type of labor, even though we know there is another governing body called the NAIA that athletes can participate in. But where does all the attention, all the media, all the glory? We think about NCAA. But the courts ruled that the NCAA was not acting fairly, as in this free exchange between the buyer and seller was not taking place. Now, the NCAA was formed in 1906, and there are various perspectives in terms of why it was formed. Some would go back to the traditional reasoning that college athletes were being exploited. Others were saying that football was just a murderous type sporting event, as in players were getting harmed, players were dying, so for safety conditions. And then others feel that it was just another way for the elites, the power to hold on to their money. So let's create a governing body in which we could control things. The truth is somewhere in the middle. But the point is that NCAA was formed. But it's also important to understand that over the years, with the formation of the NCAA, there were various athletes who were saying, this isn't fair. There's something going on here. Now, the NCAA rules still prevent schools from paying athletes directly. As in, coaches can't offer incentives in terms of money for high school athletes to come play at their school. But what we've had is a very, very important case. Ed O'Bannon, former All-American great lefty at UCLA. His class action suit against the NCAA was the beginnings of the grumblings, where it's national attention in terms of what the NCAA was doing to athletes as an unfair, it's an unfair situation and that college athletes should be paid. The case is called O'Bannon versus NCAA. And I note this book, he's one of the references that I'm going to refer to later for resources, Michael McCann, who is a UVA graduate, telling the story of what happened and that the NCAA lost. They sued the NCAA and EA, Electronic Arts, the video game, for violating antitrust laws by conspiring to prevent college athletes from receiving compensation from the NIL. So they say one thing and they do the other. That is, the NCAA simultaneously banned college athletes from profiting off their image, but then turned around and profited off of licensing the college athletes' image to this video company. So you can't have it both ways, and they were caught. And the appeals court ruled for the athletes that the NCAA did violate antitrust rules, but it didn't completely strike down what the NCAA was doing, as in they allowed the NCAA to continue to restrict college athletes in terms of payments, as in the name, image, and likeness. It was still it was still being permitted. The court's ruling merely required the schools to provide athletes up to the full cost of attendance to attend the school, which was already in place with the NCAA policy. So now schools had the ability to decide subjectively how much we're going to actually compensate athletes. Scholarships, grant and aid, and now we can have a little subjectivity in terms of how much we can actually pay our athletes through scholarships. And you can imagine there was great advantage for certain schools. And especially if your state politicians are for your college doing really, really well in sports. So the judge ordered the NCAA to pay $44.4 million in attorney fees and another $1.5 million in costs to lawyers for the plaintiffs. So this opened up more questions and more lawsuits in terms of athletes being paid. The largest of these advancements came in 2019 when California enacted the Fair Pay to Play Act. And of course, other states started creating laws as well. So not only did it protect athletes in the state of California, which again, advantage if you went to school to UCLA versus if you went to Texas Tech, it also allowed collegiate athletes to hire agents and other representatives to help negotiate and secure commercial deals. So again, you can start to see the imbalance that's happening all across the country. And I give you an example here of what's happened in the state of Virginia. Just April of last year, our Governor Youngkin signed House Bill 1505, joined by representatives from our largest state schools here, Virginia Tech, and other schools. So now state colleges and universities can compensate their own student athletes through NIL deals without any restrictions from the NCAA. It went into effect July 1 of last year. Now, Dr. Carla Williams, our athletic director, she continues to she's very, very hopeful that a federal policy will help to calm these storms in terms of what's going on all across the country. So I just want to share with you a bit about the Alston case.
The National Collegiate Athletic Association is an organization that governs college-level athletics programs. The association has monopsony control over college athletics and is very profitable, generating over $1 billion in revenue each year. However, it limits the type and amount of compensation given to student athletes. In National Collegiate Athletic Association versus Alston, the United States Supreme Court considered whether the association's compensation restrictions violated antitrust law. In 2014, a group of student athletes, including Sean Alston, filed a lawsuit in federal district court against the National Collegiate Athletic Association. The athletes alleged that the association's rules limiting student-athlete compensation violated Section 1 of the Sherman Act. The association defended its rules, arguing that the compensation limits promoted amateurism and distinguished college athletics from professional athletics. At trial, the district court conducted a full rule of reason analysis. The court found that due to the association's monopsony power in the relevant market, its compensation limits had significant anti-competitive effects. Although the court recognized that compensation limits unrelated to education served the pro-competitive benefit of maintaining amateurism, it concluded that the association's limits on education-related compensation violated Section 1 by unreasonably restraining competition among schools for college athletes. The district court enjoined the association from limiting education-related compensation. The association appealed the injunction, arguing that the district court erred by conducting a rule of reason analysis instead of a quick-look analysis. The Ninth Circuit disagreed and affirmed the district court's ruling. The Supreme Court granted cert.
Oh, let me back up here just a. So again, the NCAA rules restricting certain education-related benefits for student athletes violate federal antitrust laws. The NCAA must allow for certain types of academic benefits such as computers, science equipment, musical instruments, and other tangible items not included in the cost of attendance calculation, but nonetheless is related to the pursuit of educational study. So this is the monumental case. Now, I mentioned the NCAA versus Oklahoma. Again, they ruled that the NCAA could still kind of have this restriction on athletes, but with the Alston case, they came back and said, no, it's not a shield anymore. You promoting amateurism, that can't be used anymore in terms of how you are restricting athletes in terms of compensation. As in, there was nothing so unique about the NCAA or amateur sports to alter the traditional method of analysis applied to claims of antitrust violation. Nothing else will hold up. So how do we do this? The collectives, most often they pull funds from boosters and businesses to help facilitate NIL deals for athletes and also help them create athletes' own entrepreneurial ideas in terms of how to make money. They are independent organizations that fundraise money for various universities, and then they give it to attending athletes in the terms of an NIL agreement. There's more than 250 NCAA Division I collectives. Most of them are just doing it on their own. A group of friends, a group of boosters, a group of donors, people who love their particular athletic team. And they created these entities. Now they can be categorized as for-profit or non-profit. But June of 2023, the IRS, the Office of the Chief Counsel, published a memo stating that most NIL collectives should not, in fact, be classified as profits, as in non-profits. So all of those collectives who started out and said, let's be nonprofit. So if someone wants to help our athletes and get a tax deduction or get some type of tax advantage, that you're running the risk that you might not be able to have that tax advantage. And so a lot of NIL collectives had to restructure and think about, okay, what are we going to do now? Because if you're thinking that you want to make this donation, whether it's $1,000 or $100,000 or $1 million, you're thinking about, well, what are my tax ramifications? And now you're not sure, and the NIL collective isn't for sure. The collectives. Now, one thing I will say is that many collectives today are a part of a collective association. So they are trying to regulate themselves to some degree. But I have some bullet points here. They collect money from boosters, facilitate various NIL endorsement opportunities. They help empower the athletes to make informed NIL contract decisions. They help them monetize their personal brands, and they advise athletes on their off-field adventures and ventures. On Monday, October 7th, 2024, there was a preliminary approval of this ruling, House versus NCAA, basically to resolve 3 major lawsuits. Because now we're saying revenue sharing is in play. Revenue sharing is now in play. Again, the NCAA is making, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And how do we share this now with our athletes? This historic settlement changes the landscape of college sports in many ways. Now, if they tried to settle these 3 lawsuits independently, the word is that the NCAA could have lost nearly $4 billion. But instead, by combining them, the preliminary ruling, it will be about $2.8 billion. And this is going to former athletes as well, from 2016 to 2024. Probably about 14,500 college athletes who played during that time period, primarily football and men's basketball, will receive compensation. Some points about House versus NCAA. Again, players will be eligible to receive benefits from member schools that were previously prohibited. See, with NIL, the schools weren't paying the athletes. The local business person was. That donor was paying them, but still the athletic departments were not paying the athletes. But now that is changing. And again, former players also will be compensated. Following the House settlement, players will be eligible to accept a plethora of benefits formerly unavailable: mental health resources, nutrition support, life skills development, and extended medical coverage after they stop competing. After they stop competing. Now, since athletes will still be permitted to contract with third parties for NIL rights, the settlement establishes a very robust NIL enforcement and oversight program with mandatory reporting to a clearinghouse for any NIL payments over $600. So the question now is, how do you define fair market value? If there's a business owner that wants to pay an athlete $1,000 to sit and watch paint dry, so be it. Buyer and seller agrees. If there's a business person, a donor who wants to have the athlete come and stand during the bar mitzvah party and just stand in the corner and pay that person, I don't know, $100,000. So you can't have it both ways. How are you going to regulate this? The average Power 4 conference school will likely compensate its athletes over 7 times over what the average Group 5 conferences. And so hopefully you're familiar with, all the different changes in the college sport world in terms of who's in our conferences. But now we basically have 4 conferences that are the power group, okay? And then everybody else, the other 5 conferences, are considered the group of 5. And so we've got major, major disparity. Now, most of this money, again, being paid by the athletic department, will go to football. 75% will go to football. About 10 to 12% will go to men's basketball. And then everybody else, depending on the school, they'll have to figure out where the money is going to be allocated. In addition, the settlement eliminates scholarship limits in all sports. Instead, rosters will receive a limit and schools have the subjectivity, have the discretion to offer partial or full scholarships, provided that the roster limit is not exceeded. I know when I first came to the University of Virginia, in fact, we still have a running joke amongst our alumni group. You all might be familiar with Valerie Ackerman. She was one of my teammates. Valerie is the current commissioner of the Big East. And she always giggles in some of her presentations about how she and Dory, another teammate, actually split a scholarship in half. And scholarships also, it was kind of assumed when you attended the university that you would be playing, your scholarship will be good for 4 years. So today, athletic scholarships are basically 1 year. And hopefully you're performing well, you're doing well in your academics, and then it will be renewed. But I've read one too many horror stories where athletes come in and they don't necessarily perform maybe the way the coaches were hoping, maybe the way they hoped they were going to play. And then the coach says, sorry, your scholarship's gone. And sometimes that announcement is told towards the end of the season or end of the school year. So the athlete doesn't even have a good opportunity to shop and find another university. But you can stay at this university, you're academically fine, but you're not going to get your scholarship. You're not going to receive your scholarship. Definitely, there's a lot of critique around the House versus NCAA, and it does not preempt or resolve competing state legislation around NIL. States are still calculating, and especially in the states in the Deep South. States are becoming increasingly more autonomous in the realm of NIL, sometimes bypassing the NCAA completely. And again, I mentioned California and Virginia. So one of the biggest concerns I have is for taking care of that 17 to 22, 23-year-old in light of what is going on with all of these rules and legislation being passed. And so just want to share with you some examples of challenges for the athlete. I believe there's a lot of disinformation, there's a lot of exploitation that's being now hyper applied in this situation. So the athlete has to think about, whom do I trust? Whom do I trust? Who do I build this relationship with? And certainly when you're playing with football and when you're thinking about men's basketball, there's so many layers of coaches now. I know I've spoken to a number of athletes at various schools who stated it's very hard for them to even get an appointment with the head coach. They have to go through their positions coach. They have to go through someone else. And so the days of when the head coach is actually recruiting you and talking to you a lot, again, for most athletes, and I'm not talking about those elite athletes, it can be very, very challenging. Whom do I trust? It's a very unregulated market. And I can give a shout out to academics for our athletic department here, because I know they're one of the key units on college campuses in helping establish trust, because they do know that the athletic career will end. The average career for an NFL athlete, National Football League, is about 3.5 to 4 years. That's it. Not a long time period. And thank heavens there are some universities with law schools that will offer free NIL clinics for students to help them learn. But I want to point out a really, really disturbing case. Chicago Bears rookie Gervon Dexter. He worked with this company. It was a speculative investment company called Big League Advance Fund. Dexter had agreed to pay BLA 15% of his pre-tax NFL earnings for the next 25 years in exchange for a one-time payment of about $436,000. Now, in his first rookie season, he signed with the Bears for $6.72 million. Now, based on his agreement with BLA, in the first deal, he owes them $1 million. And he's going to continue to owe BLA 15% on all subsequent deals he makes for his entire NFL career. Millions of dollars in exchange for $400,000. Florida legislator Chip LaMarca likened the agreement to a predatory payday loan. Now, when Mr. Dexter signed this deal, he wasn't represented by an agent and had no legal oversight on his contract. And this is what can happen in an unregulated market. An example. Jaden Rashada, he's the first known college athlete to sue his coach or booster due to an NIL deal. Now, this one alleges that Rashada was promised $13.85 million in compensation over 4 years, with $1 million to be paid up front by the University of Florida. According to Rashada, these promises, it was designed to lure him away from the University of Miami, who were offering him a $9.5 million deal. They never honored it. Florida never paid. And so Rashada left the school in January of last year after the deal fell through. Quarterback Matthew Sluka. Now this one was really, this was definitely noteworthy. A lot of people paid attention to this because Sluka, he left the UNLV football team after 3 games into last college football season because he was told he would receive $100,000 in NIL funds that were promised to him during recruiting. So here's your star quarterback just leaves the team. Now, in all of these instances, some would argue that the player in the school would have benefited from a fixed employment contract detailing the exchange of university funds in consideration for athletic services. The athlete. So we've got predatory contracts, athletes signing away their rights in perpetuity, colleges taking higher percentages. I've heard stories of athletes not being allowed to create their own logos. It is now owned by someone else. And then the rights to create merchandise without the athlete's permission. There are many, many horror stories around brand, the organization, the national brand. They'll send the athlete gear because young people want gear. In fact, I still like gear, okay? And then the athlete is now responsible for creating content. This is all about social media and posts. There are athletes who are receiving $10,000 per post. There are athletes who are receiving $200,000 per post. But I've seen athletes struggle. They don't necessarily have that sales and marketing and creative and imaginative gift. And so now they're sitting in their room struggling. How do I create a video? How do I do something that's going to draw eyeballs to this brand? It creates a lot of pressure, a lot of athletes becoming very depressed about this responsibility. Then there are athletes who consider, well, should I go pro or should I stay in college and make NIL money? This is one of the biggest cases for Angel Reese, former star at LSU, now with Chicago Sky in the WNBA. She was making more money in college, possibly, than what she could make in the WNBA. And of course, we know high school athletes, wow, they are really, really facing a tough time. They don't necessarily have the resources that a lot of colleges will offer recruits or advisors. So it's very, very challenging during this time period. Livy Dunn, who was the star athlete for LSU gymnastics, her brand is now valued over $4 million. $4 million. And yet with all these pressures. So she hired her sister to run everything. As in editing the post, telling her where to be at a certain time, making sure that she's supporting her, of course, of being at all the gymnast meets. But she hired her sister to do all this for her. Now, her sister is actually is a pre-med major at LSU. But she knew that her sister had a very short window in terms of the time to capitalize on this. But not everybody has a sister or a family member or a close friend who would put their career and future on hold to do this for them. Okay. So when the NCAA agreed to the House versus NCAA settlement, they agreed on a $22 million rev share or salary cap for each school. Functionally, that was to spread the talent all across the NCAA and create profitable parity. To this day, the most socialistic sports entity is the NFL on any given Sunday. Now, we used to say there was an exception for the Detroit Lions, and now we can't say that anymore. Sorry for all you Detroit fans out there, right? But the NFL believes in all for one, one for all. That's why they continue to find ways to manage Jerry Jones, because Jerry Jones and his brand with the Dallas Cowboys, I mean, as they say, the America's team. Now Philly's the America's team. But nonetheless, they have to keep everybody on a parity type level. That helps to bring in money. It gives people belief and hope. They keep buying tickets. Yes, my team will make it to the championship or maybe even the Super Bowl. And this is what the NCAA is trying to do. But there's one problem here. The NIL collectives were already paying players, and none of those payments would contribute to the salary cap. See, that's separate from the revenue share. You've got NIL payments. In the NCAA's opinion, collective payments are a way to circumvent the salary cap that they've set up. Now, clearinghouse and collectives would be against this. Why? If there were a third-party entity evaluating the legitimacy of each NIL deal over $600, school collectives would immediately lose their ability to pay their players above the cap. So Livy Dunn is a part of a lawsuit saying the NCAA, how can you decide what is the fair market value of my deals? Besides the fact, this is private, it's between me and the seller. You can't get in my business. There's no way that athletes should have to send their information, send their deals to a clearinghouse. How do you define what's something worth in New York versus Utah versus Florida? So the lawsuits will continue. So the transfer portal, it began more as a curiosity than a game changer back in October of 2018. The NCAA used to be very, very restrictive in terms of whether or not athletes could transfer. You basically had to sit out a year, while coaches went from school to school based on the deal. And again, I don't know where you stand on this perspective. Some people feel the athletes should stay. Maybe should be required to stay for 2 years, as in take this decision very seriously. But on the other side, again, what about the coaches? They don't have to stay. They don't owe a school anything. They're going for that better deal. So how does it work? Players inform their compliance department when they're likely to enter the transfer, when they would like to enter the transfer portal. Typically, a player's name is listed in the database within 48 hours. Players are not required to tell their coaches that they're going into the portal. Now, once you're listed in the portal, schools are free to contact them. Communication with a player before they enter the portal is a violation and is considered tampering. And I've heard Coach Deion Sanders talk about the tampering that's taken place. I've heard other coaches mention it as well. Players never technically exit the transfer portal once they submit their name. If a player signs with a new school, they're listed as matriculated in the portal. If a player chooses to go back to their previous school, they're listed as withdrawn. Now, there's no doubt many athletes enter into the transfer portal and they don't get any interest from other schools, okay? But there's no requirement for the school to take them back. So you need to be pretty sure. And you need to have a very good relationship with your coaches. And it's just noteworthy that six out of the past 8 Heisman Trophy winners were all transfers. Now, some people would say this is a check on the cheaters because players will leave after 1 year, even though you paid them. So if you don't treat me right, if I don't like how I'm being developed, I'm just going to the next school. And of course, there are examples for the athletic system and what they go through. The administrators, the coaches. A big case that drew a lot of attention down in the Triangle is that UNC basketball lost out on AJ Dibansa. AJ Dibansa in the upper corner there. They lost out on a 5-star athlete considered probably the #1 pick in the 2026 NBA draft to BYU. BYU. The tradition of UNC men's basketball versus BYU. And it's been stated that BYU gave Dibansa a $5 million NIL contract. I don't know where the truth is in this. Some people are saying that UNC was ready to pay the money. Others were saying that UNC did not have the money to pay this gentleman this amount. And then when we think about Cooper Flagg at Duke, how much was he paid by Duke to attend Duke? So we have another issue of private versus public schools and what can be disclosed. Seemingly little attention has been paid to mid-majors or lower level D1 schools. Very, very challenging there. But these are the challenges for our athletic administrators. Buying the best recruits. The rules are unclear. Athletic director shifting role, you go in to run an athletic department. You know, I had a wonderful conversation with Dr. Williams about NIL a few months ago. And I said, wow, this is just like running the Washington Mystics, the WNBA. And she said, no, it's different from that. It's like running a conglomerate, as in you're running the Washington Mystics, the Washington Commanders, and the, I was going to say the Bullets, oh my gosh, the Capitals, right? Of running all of those at the same time. Very, very challenging. And now you've got athletic departments as marketing agents. They can openly broker deals. Are you going to compete with your own collective? Our collective is called CAV Futures. Some schools are pulling the collectives in to the athletic department. Others are saying, no, you can still exist. And now they're going to be competing with the athletes in terms of deals and providing advice. And then again, smaller schools have to comply. So for athletic departments, they definitely have to reimagine their strategy. This is a new day. Do you focus on building facilities, or do you look at endowing coaches to attract athletes and transfers? Athletic department staff positions have to change, new roles, new positions, more training. And one thing is very clear, you have to feed the monster. Football is king in college sports. And so now you have to be very clear with everyone in your athletic department, if they don't know already. Football drives us. Football pays the bills. We have to get people to come out and purchase tickets. We have to have a winning product. So don't be surprised by the shift here in Charlottesville. Football pays the bills. And then, of course, athletes as employees. We still haven't finished that entire argument around it, okay? For years and years, there have been rumblings that the amateur model is not sustainable, that the money and greed were becoming too big. You've got universities paying coaches millions of dollars while preaching amateurism, which is really about maintaining free labor. And at the football championship level, you've got the bowl level, ACC, SEC, Big 12, Big 10. But at the FCS level, the lower level football, none of them are making money on athletics. So they're going to start cutting programs. And I think we're going to see this at the Power 4 level as well. Carolina has 28 varsity sports. Can they sustain success in all of those sports without asking more and more money from donors and sponsors? Now, to compete at the football bowl subdivision, schools have to sponsor at least 16 sports. Carolina's sponsoring 28. Alabama is sponsoring 16. Fewer teams to manage, fewer teams to pay for. Virginia, tell me if I'm wrong, 25. 27 now, whoa, 27 sports. Can we maintain this? Can we maintain this? So I didn't even go into all these different aspects here of things that are still concerning for every system, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's financial services, and sports is a system. So we've got issues in terms of helping those who are disabled and playing sports as great athletes. We've got ageism concerns that we have to think about. We've got classism. Some people say critics of the settlement also noted that the proposed 22% revenue sharing plan pales in comparison to American professional sports, where athletes get around 50% of the revenue. Okay? We've got racism, as in the optics and all this. You've got the Black athlete, you've got the white owner. The collectives are generally run by older white men. We've got sexism issues in sports still. The 2024 rookie salaries for the top draft picks in women's basketball, $76,000. For men's basketball, $12.5 million. Okay. And then we've got the whole concern around sex sells, wearing the lipstick and the skimpy outfits and garments. And then, of course, you're trying to create content. And when I think about women's basketball, last year's women's basketball game drew record attendance and saw more than 18.7 million viewers tune in. It also outdrew the men's national championship. So again, budgets are going to have to be cut. Some people say, Title IX really should not apply because we're talking about fair market value of a marketing deal versus educational related expenses. Now you can imagine attorneys, especially Title IX attorneys, are going to be all over this. Because how can all this money, well, not all of it, 75% go to football, okay? So I know there'll be issues there. Open your arms to change, but don't let go of your values. I think that's one of the most key things that we can do in athletics, remembering that regardless of what's going on all around us, how do we hold on to our values? In the midst of possibly having further imbalance in collegiate sports, and now we're talking not only in the size of the school, but also large markets, cities versus smaller schools and smaller markets having the advantage, the lack of uniformity in state laws, and then of an increase in businesses that are exploiting young people through questionable business practices. So there's definitely a lot to consider. So I will close out with some resources. Every public institution has to submit their athletic data in terms of their budgets and their numbers to the Equity in Athletics database, and that is one of the resources listed there. I had the opportunity to meet Christy Dosh. We've done some work together, an attorney. Her Business from Sports site is one of the best if this is an area that you want to go into and learn from. And then I mentioned Michael McCann. He's just been a brilliant lawyer in this space for at least the past decade. So I definitely recommend those. Now, for those of you who are interested in going into college sports as a career, just a few things I want to make note of. First off, experience counts. You must get experience. For every position that's out there, there's at least 100 other candidates who are as good as you. So you need experience. Volunteer. Volunteer. I always tell my students, it's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's who knows you on a favorable basis. It's not what you know, it's not who you know, it's who knows you on a favorable basis. So I can sum this up by just being kind. Just being kind. And every time you meet with a professor, time you meet with an athletic administrator, when you're asking for something, don't leave the room without saying, how can I help you? Because people will remember that. There's no doubt you're UVA, you're smart, you are brilliant, you're a leader, but you have to distinguish yourself. And so get to know people, take care of people. The business of social media, I definitely learned it. It's one thing just to post and to do the TikToks and the Instagrams and all of that, but try to understand the business of social media. Don't ignore those analytics. When I first started in this space, who would think that someone could graduate from college and walk into a job paying $75,000 a year doing social media? But that's the reality today. And it's something that's fun, okay? LinkedIn, you must have a good LinkedIn profile. You must. That is your online resume. All the other stuff that you're doing for fun and all that, leave that on IG, leave that on other platforms, but you must keep your LinkedIn updated. And then a very good friend of mine has a company called Teamwork Online. You must get your information on Teamwork Online. Companies do hire off of Teamwork Online. Okay. So I want to thank you for your time. And if we have a moment, if anybody has any questions or comments, I'd love to chat. Any comments, agree, disagree, any other perspectives out there?
Hi, thank you so much for this talk. I've been following a lot of this topic recently with all of the legislation and policy, and I saw just recently that the Department of Education rescinded a Biden administration order that under Title IX allowed female and male athletes to be compensated through the NIL proportionately, and you were kind of touching on this on the end, but I was kind of wondering what you make of it, whether this will be legally challenged, and what implications this will have for gender equity in college sports.
Definitely, there will be more conversation. The attorneys are swarming now in terms of how we're going to handle this. There is an attack on higher ed right now. And again, where you stand often depends on where you sit. And having been a professor and also being an entrepreneur, I see what's going on higher ed, the attack on humanities, the attack on trying to find ways to kind of slow down this economic and educational engine. And then some people would argue that women don't need to be playing sports, and not at this level, just flat out. And so football is king, and we're going to try and manage everything around the male athlete. So I definitely think more lawsuits will be coming, and this will be challenged for sure.
Just one quick comment. It seems like some schools like Duke, John Shire, and Nina King at Duke have gotten out way ahead of this with regards to hiring general managers and things like that to negotiate these NIL deals and manage the transfer portal. UNC just recently announced that they're going to do, Hubert Davis, who is struggling a little bit this year, is doing the same thing. And I wondered if UVA has plans for that, if you've spoken to Carla about that. And then the other question that I would have is, going forward, even if this Supreme Court ruling goes through and we're paying roughly $20 million, the vast majority going to football and then 15% to basketball, there's still going to be NIL deals on top of that. So schools like the University of Texas and Ohio State are going to continue to spend over $30 million a year on their football team, while other schools will not. How do you see that playing out, and how is the playing field going to be leveled?
So I want to go back to the general manager position. I'm very biased in this, being an entrepreneur. I've been to a number of universities, and they just lack the entrepreneurial spirit. As in, this is the way we've done it, and they're just slow to the ball game. And it's really sad. It's really sad. Now, I do understand the other side, because you want to protect your athletes, you want to protect your coaches, you don't want anybody coming in. But when I think about the brilliance of these amazing top public Ivy universities, there are a lot of alumni who have an entrepreneurial spirit that should sit in on meetings, that should provide opinions, sign a little NDA or whatever, but they're just missing it. But when you look at college sports at this level, it is big business. So if you look at big business for the NBA or the NFL, you have that general manager. You have all these other positions, and that's what's needed today. I've not spoken to her about whether or not UVA basketball will do that. If they aren't going to name the position, I'm sure there's somebody in the office that is handling some of those responsibilities. The advantage and disadvantage is already taking place. I used to think of UVA in the middle in terms of athletic budget, but if anybody Googles it, we're talking UVA budget, 160 million, 180 million. Now, Ohio State is over 200, right? And then people say that NIL will definitely, the number one state schools that will win is Texas because of oil money. Deep, deep pockets, and they want to win. So I think possibly maybe that's why Nick Saban, was railing about this and that. We know what Nick Saban was doing, okay? And so now to have this competition to be able to pay at the same level as Alabama. And I'm not saying anything that you can't quote me on. I've been to Tuscaloosa back in the 80s, and I saw what was happening there, right? And so, of course, and some other schools, but I won't list those. From my students, you all know what I said in class, all right? But the difference in the schools, that's definitely going to happen. Deep, deep pockets. Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for doing this Batten Hour. Thought it was very informative, especially as someone who has this as their policy of interest. What you mentioned a little bit about, it's not about who you know or what you know about who knows you on a favorable basis, and talking about getting as much real world experience as you can. What experiences have you noticed here at UVA or at UNC? And then maybe how did those difference from your experiences when you were first starting out in your career?
So I'm not familiar so much in terms of what's going on the grounds, pun intended, here at UVA, but I am a big part of the of the Chapel Hill initiative to make sure our students get opportunities. And one of the things that I'm still in charge of are Carolina Sport Business Club. And because I'm an entrepreneur and have lots of relationships, my students get to benefit from that. And so, giving them leads, giving them career advice. People call me all the time for jobs. Do I know sharp students? I just refer. But having a sport management undergraduate degree, that really, really helps. Now, again, I'm biased. My blood bleeds orange. I would love to see UVA continue to improve in that area, but it looks like we have some silos here. Silos, and that's what needs to be connected. And maybe one of my conversations with Dr. Williams is how can we get this connected better? Because you all just don't know the UVA athletic tree here, as in so many people with UVA degrees are running college and pro sports, but we're not connecting. I remember talking to our former athletic director, Craig Littlepage, about this, and we were just listing all the different people with UVA connections who are out there in the sports world. But how do we connect all that? Maybe I can ask some students to help me start to build a LinkedIn page, with everybody in sports, pro or college sports, who wants to help, because we want to see other people, with our degrees sitting next to us and doing well. Yeah. So thank you for that.
You have time for one more, Debbie?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, thanks for doing this. I really enjoyed it. Do you have a position on collective bargaining as a way to bring some structure to the current environment? And also, could that be accomplished without granting employee status to student athletes?
Very, very challenging. Great question. I know Dartmouth men's basketball, they filed to form a union. People don't like the word union, so we're calling them associations and things like that. For just some reason, the nature of our society, we just don't see young people as professionals. We want to hold on to this amateurism, but yet when we look at it, it's just so much. It's just not fair. It's just not fair. So we have to figure out the best way to do it. Some people say we should go to the European model where we just have clubs and the city owns the team. So this will be the Charlottesville Cavaliers, right? And so it would not get in the way of academics. And I know, being a professor, I know it's frustrating for me when I'm told I have to leave my office at 5 p.m. or 6 p.m. because the football game and they need our parking spots. It's like, I'm working. No, you must leave. So these are things that interrupt the academic enterprise. But right now, it's really going to be tough for the next year or two as we continue to sort this out. And power often follows money. Money often follows power. Yeah. Thank you for your curiosity. Thank you.